Welcome to this training or review on the Brian Laundrie suicide note. I've been requested by a number of people to take a look at the note and see what we can glean from it. I think it is rich with much material, much insight, perhaps a little more than some may have considered. It's a case where the murder of Gabby has touched a lot of people, and then the subsequent suicide by Brian Laundrie, the killer, has captured the imaginations of many as they've looked at this and considered it, and especially when there was an ongoing manhunt. It became something that just caught a lot of interest. I'm going to show the statement as it's written out. I think this is helpful to look at. And perhaps if you have time to take some questions, it would be interesting for us for analysis. So this is the suicide note. It's written out. I do not have a copy of all the handwritten pages. As some of you who know me from way back, I have struggled with handwriting analysis in terms of quality and consistency. And that changed for me at least years ago upon meeting Steve Johnson and working with him. Steve, not only a certified handwriting analysis instructor, but also an analyst who was terrific at statement analysis itself. Prior to that, some of the handwriting analysis that I had uncovered seemed to be without discipline, without boundaries, without principles to follow on. And what came down basically was people writing in rearview mirrors, which is part of learning, but also some of the more political positions that someone would take could influence that. And I found it very discouraging until Steve and others that have come into my life and have done terrific work. And to give you an example of Steve's work, there was an investigator in Baltimore who was working on an alleged sexual assault case. And he sent me the alleged victim's statement and asked if I would give what's called a psycholinguistic profile, basically what a person is like, dominant personality traits, telling the truth, what they want, that sort of thing, in a statement. But this particular investigator was well trained. He didn't need truth versus deception. He wanted to get to know the alleged victim. And I had sent in a profile for him. Steve got a copy of the handwritten statement, and his objective was to send in a profile based strictly on the handwriting. Unbeknownst to both Steve and myself, the investigator had a copy of the psychological profile that had been done on this particular alleged victim. And what was really fascinating is that all three matched perfectly. There was a little change in language at different times because, as you know, in the social science world, the language will sometimes change for whatever purpose. But the essential profiles were correct, and this was indeed a genuine victim who was in need of justice. And Steve, Frank Marsh, others have just done terrific work with handwriting analysis, but that's for a different time and a different perhaps a video with Steve who work on this, because I think it would be interesting and insightful. Next, we have what's called the intended recipient versus the unintended recipient. An intended recipient is right here. He's writing to Gabby. He's writing to Gabby. That's the intended recipient. The unintended recipient is when the writer understands other people will be seeing this. I liken it to visitation at a jailhouse. where there's a recording being made and the subject is speaking to the person across the glass, answering questions, that sort of thing, but has one eye on the camera, knowing full well that the unintended recipient, which is we find most often to be the important one, a higher priority than the intended recipient. That's where we get some of our best information from. So the person that's speaking through the glass to someone, knowing that the recording is on, is really speaking to the public, to police, trying to influence other things. That's the unintended recipient, technically unintended, but really the target of the information. So we look at that as an important piece, and you'll see that here. So this will be just a brief study and some insight into Brian Laundrie's personality. Now remember, when we speak, we all do this, whether we speak or write. We give away things about our background, things that we've experienced in life, things that are of interest to us. We give our reasons often for writing, which is very helpful when you're assessing a threat, like an anonymous author threatening someone. We also give away our dominant personality traits. So the more that someone speaks, the more we're able to learn what it is about them that's driving them to do this. So here we have a letter that was written perhaps at the place where he was hiding in Florida. And he wrote, "Gabby, I wish I was right at your side. I wish I could be talking to you right now. I'd be going through every memory we've made." And so many of you know that we follow the pronouns, and we see that there's a bond here that he's addressing. "Getting even more excited for the future. I can't live without you. I've lost every day we could spend together, every holiday. I'll never get to play with," and this is where at times where we're not sure what the wording is. "Again, never go hiking with TJ. I loved you more than anything. I can't bear to look at your photos to recall great times. And here's why, because it is why I can't go on. When I close my eyes, I will think of laying on the roof of the van, falling asleep at the side of the meteor shower at the Crystal Geyser. I will always love you." So the first thing that will impress you is how much he focuses upon himself. Now, some from body language disciplines, others just from good, strong criminal backgrounds, were able to look at the videos and some of the things that we did have while the hunt was going on, and we're able to conclude that there's some real strong narcissistic traits here. This led to I think a misunderstanding that's pretty common, and it's one of those things that it gets repeated so many times that people believe it has to be true just because of the repetition, but that a narcissist won't commit suicide because they're too selfish. And that's not a good understanding of someone that is that focused upon self. Remember, they perceive things differently than the rest of us. And if the most important person in the universe lets you down, where else can you turn? If you've only turned within, if that's all you've known, where else can you turn? There's no place to go. It's not someone whose life has been given to serving and helping others. And so narcissists do commit suicide. And there's generally a reason behind it. And we can maybe find some things in here. But you'll notice that this is all about him. All about him and what could have been together, and even giving us the reason why he can't go on. He's writing to someone that he killed. And this is the intended recipient, which we know that the unintended recipient, which he's about to address here, is far more important than Gabby. And that may be seen something that's obvious in what he had done to her, but it's important to understand through the language. So a couple of things that we get into this, we find that his very heavy, strong pronoun use, the pronoun I. In other words, he is at this point He is very psychologically present. He's there. He is linguistically committed to this. And it's about him. It's about him. In memory, this is his perception. He joins a bond together with her, which may be indicative that he's planning on killing himself at this point. But it could also be in some of the past memories. But it is how he perceives himself and how he perceives his relationship with her. He gives it some emphasis, like every holiday, I'll never get to play with so-and-so again, never go hiking. And here you see a little bit of a change with the pronouns. He drops it right here. And this I find very interesting. He drops the pronoun I, which he's been using strongly here when it comes to hiking. So we're going to look for insight with that, with the hiking. I loved you more than anything. I can't bear to look at our photos to recall our great times because it is why I cannot go on. She can't go on, but he's now saying that he can't go on. He can't even look at the photos, which may be more disdain than we may realize. Then he goes to the unintended recipient, and this is where it elevates, and it allows us to gain further insight into his perspective and maybe even what happened. If you were reading Gab's journal, looking at the photos from our life together, flipping, and this is added in, this is Latin for thus, meaning this is how it was written originally and misspelled. Through old cards, you wouldn't want to live a day without her. So this is a conditional, and this is a portrayal of what their life together was like. This is a sense of insight into a manipulative personality. We sometimes wonder with the great advent and overwhelming at times popularity of social media, where people seem to feel that their life is so important that every minute detail must be put out for social media and lots of photos. He's cognizant of that here. He's cognizant of the reputation and how he's presented. And that's consistent with what some of the body language experts and others said regarding the videos of when, including the body cam of when police were involved there. Knowing that every day you'll wake up without her, you wouldn't want to wake up. So this is now the universal. Remember, he's addressing people that are reading her journals. It's no longer him, but it's others. And then we have, I'm sorry to everyone this will affect. Gabby was the love of my life, but I know adored by many. I'm so very sorry to her family. And I will have a need to explain why I'm sorry, which should not be. And so this is where I think people that were just reading this naturally were saying to themselves, this is disingenuous. This is someone who is a manipulator. This is someone who is focused upon self, and something went wrong within that narcissistic type of personality. I consider her younger siblings my best of friends. I'm sorry, he does it again one more time. I'm sorry to my family. For what? For what? For what? For what? And then we have this, which is very concerning to me. This is a shock to them, as well as a terrible grief. And again, the Latin thus, sic, meaning this is the way it was presented, spelling. This is a shock to them. So one of the questions that Gabby's family has had, I think they know their answer. as well as the public in general, is what did the Laundrie family know and when did they know it? I did a video months ago on Cassie Laundrie, as she was targeted with some real anger through social media. And as we looked at the video and analyzed her statement, she was telling the truth. She didn't know. This may be a little bit of insight into the fact that this did not come completely as a shock to his family. His family. They may have been very well aware of the domestic violence, of his own temper, of his own focus upon self, which can become immediately disappointed, enraged. And so this unnecessary statement that it came a shock to them, this unnecessary statement may be giving us insight into the fact that the family wasn't entirely shocked. This will give further questioning of whether or not his family, particularly his mother, may have wanted to facilitate or even help in intention his escape from justice. They loved as much, if not more than me, a new daughter to my mother, an aunt to my nephews. Please do not make this harder for them. This occurred as an unexpected tragedy. And so this I'm also highlighting in red. And this may give insight in that he may have premeditated this. Not necessarily before the trip, but over time on the trip. So I look these together, and then we find another element here. So we have what he calls an unexpected and then a tragedy. A tragedy. A tragedy is something that befalls us that is not intended. That is to minimize murder or really to deny it. So let's see what happened then. What was the unexpected tragedy that would be a shock to them as well as a terrible grief? He starts off this event of what happened without the pronoun I. This is not the same type of strength that we saw earlier where he was talking about himself. Rushing back to our car, now here he finds the need, not the car or the vehicle, but he has a need to share it with her. And I think this is consistent with the theme. Rushing back, the word rushing speaks to time, not the event, but the timing of it. Rushing back to our car, trying to cross the streams of Spread Creek before it got too dark to see, too cold. So who was rushing back? Doesn't tell us. He starts off the event with time. Now he appears, I hear a splash and a scream. So what would you think of when you think of a splash and a scream? And then he's giving an audible description. This wasn't Gabby fell in. This is two of them rushing, at least are plural. Then what he hears, I heard a splash and Gabby scream. No. This is what we call, in this type of lack of priority, so soon after an event, this is what we call narrative building, or what cops love to call storytelling. It's not true. You'll notice that he switched to the present tense. He's no longer committed to the past tense. He's no longer going into experiential memory and reporting what happened. It is very likely here that we get insight into what actually happened. And then back to himself, his focus. I could barely see. I couldn't find her for a moment. Who? It's just a scream. Could be anyone. This is called the distancing language from what took place. Hearing your fiance scream, knowing that it's just you two in a stream, it's hers, unless it didn't happen, as described here. I think some things did happen here. I could barely see. I couldn't find her for a moment. I shouted her name. Nope. He dropped a pronoun there. Shouted her name. It's something really of the utmost importance. I found her breathing, heavily gasping my name. So as Gabby had this tragedy befall her, who is she thinking of but the person that portrays himself as the hero in a murder case? This is how disconnected he is. She wasn't calling out for God to save her. She was gasping his name. She was freezing cold. Now, would you be able to discern that as you're grabbing someone, as you found her at that particular moment? Or would it be, let's get you out of the water, we're both freezing cold? We had just came from the blazing hot national parks, and I wondered if this was perhaps some latency in the language about his temper. This is out of sequential order, because right now we're with her, supposedly in the water, she's freezing cold, and he goes back in time of where they were. Okay. This is a very strong example of someone that is not speaking from experiential memory. He is not telling the truth. In Utah, I'm not sure we would care about that either, but this is something he needs to write in his storytelling. The temperature had dropped to freezing, still back in time, and she was soaking wet. Were you soaking wet? I carried her as far as I could. Okay, so he is the hero of his story. Down the stream towards the car, stumbling, exhausted in shock. This is all about him. Remember, he's looking back, supposedly writing about the love of his life who's deceased. We even have his emotional state. He's writing to his mom. When my knees buckled, I knew I couldn't safely carry her. I started a fire and spooned her as close to the heat. She was so thin. That really bothers me in context. And I'll explain that in a moment. Had already been freezing too long. I couldn't at the time realize that I should have started a fire. I couldn't safely carry her. I started a fire. I realized I should have started a fire first, but I wanted her out of the cold back to the car. From where I started the fire, I had no idea how far the car might be. Only knew it was across the creek. When I pulled Gabby out of the water, now this is not I pulled Gabby out of the water, this is the element of time again. And you'll notice that he's out of sequence. He's going back in to give him more details. She couldn't tell me what hurt. So if you want to know what happened to Gabby, listen to his words. Remember how thin she was? I wondered if he was very subtly shifting blame to her for being too thin to stand up to his blows. She had a small bump on her forehead. And so, I believe, and I don't know how she died, and we'll probably learn more as we go along, but I think that this was a pretty severe assault that eventually got larger. Just on its own. This was probably continuing in his rage. Her feet hurt, her wrist hurt. I think that he assaulted her in different ways and knocking her down, that sort of thing. And she was so thin, her body couldn't withstand the blows. Her wrist hurt, but she was freezing. This is maybe where he grabbed her. And then I think this is more of the latency as he's telling us he violently shook her. Remember, she was so thin, so light. While carrying her, she continually made sounds of pain. Laying next to her, she said little, lapsing between violent shakes, gasping in pain, begging for an end to her pain. If she was still alive, I wonder if she was begging for him to call an ambulance, get help, call the authorities. She fell asleep. She would fall asleep with the lack of commitment. And I would shake her awake, fearing she shouldn't close her eyes if she had a concussion, very likely from the blows to the head. She would wake in pain, starting the whole painful cycle again. So this is the suffering that Brian's talking about himself. This is what he had to endure. Remember, this is not reality. This is his written perception of reality. This is his suffering. And he needs to portray himself as the hero of the story. The whole painful cycle again, while furious that I was the one waking her. And I think this is a subtle blaming of her again and justifying what he did to her. She wouldn't let me try to cross the creek, thought like me that this fire would go out in her sleep and she'd freeze. I don't know the extent of Gabby's injuries. I believe him there. Only that she was in extreme pain. And then we have this. We have the immersion of the strong pronoun. We don't have it beginning with time. We don't have it beginning with the drop pronoun. I ended her life. I ended her life. I thought it was merciful, that what she wanted. But now I see all the mistakes I made. Okay? He's a good guy. This, for me, in making a judgment on this furthers, I think, and strengthens the argument that this wasn't just a last-minute blow-up on his part, something where he just lost control. I ended her life is softer language. I thought it was merciful because he's a good guy. He's a merciful guy. When someone has a need to portray themselves as the good guy, as the person that should be looked up to and admired, it often speaks to the contrary, where it is someone despicable. And then he uses the word mistake. So what he did was made a mistake. No, he made mistakes plural. That tells me what was compounded in what he did to her. I panicked. I was in shock. So we have his emotions. But from the moment I decided, now there's time mentioned twice. The word decided means a deliberation. There's, whether it's quickly passing or shortly passing, to decide is to contemplate, and it's a passing of time. From the moment I decided, I took away her pain. No, nothing there. Took away her pain. I knew I couldn't go on without her. Killing her was even about himself. I rushed home to spend any time I had left with my family. And this probably is going to be very difficult as more information unwinds, civil case, that sort of thing. I am one who believes that the family, particularly mother, father, but the mother, knew of this, not only knew of his penchant for violence, but knew of the killing and was likely trying to facilitate an escape for him. I wanted to drive north and let James or TJ kill me, but I wouldn't want them to spend time in jail over my mistake. Again, we have that really extreme minimization. I wondered if he had hit her with a rock over the head, and at that point it was too far. And so what part of his description is that um, she lay dying before him from the blows in the head. I am ending my life not because of fear of punishment. So we have the rule of the negative, elevated importance, what he's telling us not for. And I think this is where you can say the narcissist did not want to go to prison. He was following at all anything on social media. He knew he was hated for what he had done. And it wouldn't have gone well for him in prison. I cannot stand to live another day without her. Hey, how's Gabby's life going? This is not about that. This is about him. I've lost out our whole future together. She lost her life. Every moment we could have cherished. I'm sorry for everyone's loss. Please do not make life harder for my family. And I think this is him recognizing that his mother or parents could be in trouble. They lost a son and a daughter, the most wonderful girl in the world. Gabby, back to her now. I'm sorry. I have killed myself by this creek in hopes that animals may tear me apart, that it may make some of her family happy. What a good guy there, trying to make others happy. That's all he's trying to do. Please pick up all my things. Gabby hated people who litter. And this obviously would be something that would infuriate her family of the hatred that he held for her in that. Any questions I can take now for a few minutes? I like that, Tanya, a narcissistic collapse. I think that's a good way of putting it. Get that screen clear up there. Eric, great point about the water references. I don't know enough about his background, but to reach this point, there had to be trauma, I believe, in his childhood. This was a really messed up guy, so that's something that I'd like to explore. Although I don't think that the parents would be willing to cooperate with anything, and they're suffering, but this just isn't something that happens in a happy household. So I think it may go back to some early trauma. Very good point. How will the judge decide? I don't know. It's so difficult to predict. Psychopathic or a notch below? Mark, I don't know. I think sometimes that word is thrown around a great deal, but I don't know. He does subtly blame her, and he has a need to portray himself as a hero. Someone wrote, he seemed like a spoiled brat. To that, Sally, I agree, and Eric's observation may be insightful into that part of his life. If there was a trauma that took place very early in life, there could have been overcompensation by his mother, where she shielded him from consequences. It seemed like there was, and this is you can go back to Cassie's statement, but he may have been the favored child, not Cassie. So, yeah, great point, Tanya. The water cleansing, the same theme with Eric. Trish question, what do I think? And again, I don't know, but what I think was there was likely he began an assault on her that may have even gone on for a couple of days beforehand. And I think he may have gone after her with a rock or knocked her down so badly that she fell against a rock. I think he did violently shake her. I think that's why it was in his language and why he described her as being so thin. Yeah, and that, Juanita, that could be also true. Yeah, Kathy, I saw that report. His mother apparently wrote him a note offering assistance, said burn after reading. I don't know if it's true or not, but I did see that report. Yes, Mark, a psychopath could commit suicide strictly for the purpose of avoiding prison consequence, for example. Yeah, I think in terms of blaming her, this is a difficult note to even read. It shows a very hyperinflated view of self. I think it goes right back to a spoiled childhood. And what I mean by spoiled is to have a child, either it's the natural consequences in life are avoided or blunted, and they keep getting away with things, and it makes it worse. And I got that sense from Cassie. Eric is pointing out the whole discovery of him and the parents' involvement, excuse me, is suspect. I agree. And I wouldn't be surprised to find out if some of the things that the attorney's releasing is true. Paul asks a great question. You could see in Gabby early on that she was a victim of domestic violence, and could there be better training for that? There's always room for more and better training. When I look back at those things, looking at the camera, that sort of thing, it is very difficult on the fly to discern if someone's safe or not. If they have enough to arrest someone, then they can do it. It's just easier. But it's difficult to discern on the fly at that moment. Juanita wrote that Cassie was the scapegoat in that family. I think that's evident from the video. It's a good point. Domestic violence is something that is very difficult and much more complex than people realize, I think, for the most part. At times, police and other professionals will intervene in the best ways possible, and a victim may go back, putting kids at jeopardy and really making it so difficult for families that try to protect. It's very complex. It's as complex as human nature is itself. I think right now being a police officer is one of the most difficult jobs given our culture, where politicians just routinely attack them, and everything they do is wrong, and everything they do is racist, and it is very difficult. And what that has led to, I think, is what is sometimes called depolicing, where officers are cognizant of trying to survive themselves. And so they're very concerned about whatever action they take will be misinterpreted. Someone just wrote a really interesting post there. Brian, I think law enforcement would have a hard time to discern between Gabby's anxiety and being overshadowed by NDV. I agree, and that's one of those complexities that is there as well. Why did he write that? Great question. Why did he write that? If you see him in that letter, he is the center of the story. He's the hero. He's giving himself some satisfaction even before he kills himself. It is about him. And what a good guy was for killing her. It was a mistake. He struck her and hurt her and was fed up with her crying about. That's why he feels he has to explain her death, helping her. Interesting. Who is his biggest target? I think that the two families are definitely addressed. I think he was aware, I think we'll learn this later on, of the social media, or the news media at least, the coverage. I think he was aware of those things, and I think there may have been communication even earlier from his family. So I think ultimately this was about himself. This was about making himself feel better. Serial abusers are experts at finding victims. They can pick them out of a line. They see them instantly. It's true. They seem to be able to read body language very well, see into a void, look to fill it, look to be charming. So I think in a way his intended audience was himself. To his family, look what a great guy I was. I know it was a mistake now, but look at what a great guy I was. Karen, yes. Do you think being confined in the van camper accelerated the DV violence? Yes, I do. Great point. And I think, along with Eric and then Paul, predators in general can pick out victims quite well and describe it. Yeah, Juanita, I also saw the Brian playing, I thought, a very good manipulative type of stance and playing a role there. Sherry, yes, I do. I think his parents knew. I think that they, to survive, the mother, for example, would blame Gabby. Yeah, I want the readers to see me in a positive light. I did a good thing. It was a mistake, but it was only a mistake. It wasn't murder. Oftentimes the risks are like a combat grab and pulling away. If she was trying to get away from him, pulling him back in again. So, yeah, like a mercy kill. And why not use the gun? Because Beck's great point. This was very personal. He needed to do this for him, and I think that the blaming of her is consistent with that. I hope you've enjoyed this as much as anything this tragic can be enjoyed, and at least, I mean, the insight into the crime, just a terrible tragedy and a pain that people will live with for the rest of their lives. So I hope for some form of justice, of something that can come by the way of Gabby's family, maybe some closure. So thank you all for joining, and we'll see you next time on another video.